Join us this new year for new conversations at the Commonwealth Club.
Welcome to the Commonwealth Club. I'm George Hammond, Chair of the Humanities Forum, which organized tonight's event. I have with me Frank Falzone, Detective Frank Falzone, and Duffy Jennings, a Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle writer. They've written a book about Detective Falzone's years in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s as a detective here in San Francisco, at a time when lots of unfortunately interesting things were happening. This is one of over 1,000 programs that we've done since the pandemic began, but now we're back to having in-person programs. We have a great audience here in San Francisco for this program. So, Detective Falzone, first, thank you very much for joining us at the Commonwealth Club.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and for telling your story, because these stories don't get told from that point of view that often. And you have a lot of really good things to say about police work. And I think we should start there. And then we'll go to your program and say how you feel about the police. I thought you started with a Paul Harvey quote, which I thought was excellent. And so why don't you talk about your time as a policeman and how the police feel about this situation?
One of the primary reasons I wrote this book is because I was honored, and I still am honored, to have served as a San Francisco police officer. I recently had a friend. I belong to Rotary, the Rotary Club of Novato, and he's an extremely liberal doctor. And he said to me, he says, "Frank, are you proud that your two sons went into law enforcement?" I said, "Absolutely not. I wasn't proud. I had sent both my boys to college. I wanted them to be something better than their father. But they saw something real in the work that I was doing. And both my boys did follow me. The oldest boy, 5 years in the San Francisco Police Department, and another 25 with the FBI. The younger boy is now a captain with the San Francisco Police Department, and he's everything that a policeman should be." And that's what I told my friend. No, I wasn't proud, but I was very proud of the type of policemen that they were or are, because they're the type of policemen you want. They're kind, they're good. We all just witnessed what happened in Memphis. It was absolutely horrifying. But you cannot lower standards to bring in diversity. We all agree diversity is what society needs. But how do we get that? It has to be the cream of the crop. You want policemen that have a brain. What you saw in Memphis, and pretty much the night of the George Floyd incident, what you saw was ignorance, complete ignorance. That's thugs. That's the stuff that we would witness in the ghetto areas when they would attack each other. Except these guys were wearing uniforms with a badge and a gun. I was mortified and ashamed of what those officers did. I hope I answered your question.
You sure did. You sure did. And I think one of the points that you made at the beginning was that the police, that there's always, bad apples in every group, but that the percentage is even lower than among the clergy. I thought that was quite a statement to me.
No, you're so right, George. Some of the, and I mean absolutely finest men I've ever known were the men that wore the badge and stood right next to me. They dedicated their lives. They went out every day and did a job. Were there bad apples? Absolutely. Did we try to clean them out? Yes. Did we get all of them? No. There's always going to be that rogue cop that can't handle it anymore, cracks up, does something weird and dangerous to society. I'm sorry about that. But the men that I work with, I'd go back tomorrow. I was so proud to be part of the team that they represented.
Yeah, I think it's something, of course, a lot of people, as both this area of being a policeman or in the military, it's more specialized and less known by other people. It's kind of harder and harder to understand that experience, and especially the fear experience. I mean, the how dangerous these jobs are, and that you still need to have those principles that you follow, obviously, but it's a lot of pressure on the people that are doing it.
I explained tonight to the people here at the Commonwealth Club, I didn't realize how stressful my job was until I retired. And I'm dealing with it even tonight, vertigo. And I'm sure it's all stress related. I thought I was handling everything because I was the good guy going up against the bully, protecting society. I didn't realize the toll it was taken on me until as I became an older man, and I realized it's taken a toll on me. It certainly has.
Yeah. I'm sure the professional football players feel the same way. It's a slightly different source of that pressure, but this certainly affects everybody that does something that's physically demanding and in this case, emotionally demanding as well.
It's not only physically demanding, it's probably, I would say, more mentally demanding, because you have pretty much everybody second guessing you, from your superiors, the courts, district attorney's office, victims, suspects. You have to be a little bit above the ordinary person if you're going to be accepted by all these agencies that are looking at you. As a homicide investigator, it was my job to put that case together and then to present it in court, or I should say have the district attorney present it in court. And I would sit there and watch him, and I would watch that jury, because the evidence I created had to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt and to a moral certainty that I arrested the right person. And you don't want to arrest somebody just to be making an arrest, not working homicide. If you want to prove your value as a person, you want to arrest the responsible and prove it to 12 of your peers sitting on a jury.
Well, this is a crowd-pleasing question. So your life, along with a couple of other big detectives, got turned into movies and became the basis of a lot of other similar things that were going on. And so I think people would like to know, now that you can turn on television and there's like 20 different shows and it's all about detectives and everything. Do you have a favorite of all those shows? Or do you not watch them?
No, I do. I watch a lot of crime movies, but I go to the NOIR, N-O-I-R channel, and I watch all the old movies from the 50s and 60s when I felt those were real crime stories. I mean, trust me, I realize there were a lot of twists and turns that Hollywood puts into those stories, but I don't watch much of today's movies.
Okay, we got our answer. So, you have some slides and some pictures to show us?
Yes, but before I get started
Yes,
into
definitely.
that, I'd like to tell you the story of how this book came about. People are saying, these guys have been out of this work for years and years and years. Why did this suddenly, is there this book? And ultimately, behind all the homicides and the headlines, it's a small town San Francisco story. And it's a story about two boys, both born in San Francisco, both raised in the different parts of the city, who have a lot in common and didn't really understand this until just a couple of years ago, even though we crossed paths often in our work in the 70s. We're pretty close in age. Frank will be 81 in 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit younger. I'm the younger guy at 75. So, there's a lot of water under the bridge, but we were both raised, we found, essentially by strong single moms. After we each lost our father at a young age, under different circumstances. Frank's dad died of cancer when he was 9. He became the man of the house. My parents divorced when I was 3. I had very little contact with my father after that. But we grew up in the city that kind of nurtured young boys at that time. We both grew up with a love of baseball, and we played until dark on our local sandlots. Frank at Portlock Playground, me down at Funston Playground, later on our high school varsity teams. And we both identified very strongly with our native city, and we both went into careers that reflected that by working for 2 institutions with the word San Francisco in their names, the San Francisco Police Department and the San Francisco Chronicle.
Yeah.
Our paths crossed often on the streets of San Francisco and in the Hall of Justice, as I covered many of the big murder cases that Frank was called upon to investigate, namely the City Hall murders and the Zebra killings and Zodiac and some others. We both saw the underbelly of the city in a city gone haywire in a single decade. I'm talking about the 1970s. My former Chronicle reporter colleague did an Amazon review of our book in which he noted about this time frame, which was so eloquent. He said it was the best of times. It was, no, forget that. It was the worst of times, straight up. After the claptrap age of Aquarius creaked on, it gave way to a powerful and long-lasting age of darkness in San Francisco that makes present-day unpleasantness seem like a holiday with umbrella drinks at sunset. Jerry could write. The City Hall assassinations and the White Night riot that followed the manslaughter verdict, the nightmarish Jim Jones saga whose seeping court corruption spread into government and the newspaper itself, the racist black-on-white torture murders, countless anti-war riots, the AIDS inferno, the Patty Hearst kidnapping, the Zodiac killings, Huey Newton and the Black Panthers, Angela Davis and the Marin County Courthouse shootout, Altamont and the Rolling Stones, the Indian takeover of Alcatraz, the shot fired by Sarah Jane Moore that nearly took out President Ford in front of the St. Francis Hotel, the Manson family, although that was LA. It just seemed like the evils of the world had been distilled and focused like a magnifying glass on San Francisco. And this is the time frame in which Frank and I both performed our jobs. I left the newspaper in 1981 for a front office job with the Giants. But because people love nothing more than a cold case, I still today, 50 years later, get several emails a year from people convinced they know who the Zodiac killer is and I need to track this down and write about it. We both get contacted frequently by documentary filmmakers. Frank's been in dozens of these. I've been in a number of them, wanting to do some new production about an old case, mostly Zodiac. But it was just that kind of email about 2 years ago that led to the two of us sitting here with you tonight. A British filmmaker had sent an email to a number of people about a new documentary they were working on concerning a vicious home invasion case on Potrero Hill in 1974. At the time, Frank called it the worst case he'd ever seen. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit down in our presentation here. Right. But I noticed on the email that didn't blind copy the other people address, the email address of Frank Falzon. And I thought, geez, I haven't heard that name in decades. The last time I honestly remember seeing Frank Falzon was the day of the Dan White verdict, when we both sat in that courtroom on May 21st, 1979. Frank was sitting with the district attorneys. I was one of 2 reporters allowed inside the bulletproof glass to cover the case, probably 5 feet from Frank. And of course, we all know what happened, the shocking verdict and the riot that followed. But I couldn't recall ever having any contact with Frank after that. And that was 1979. So I sent him an email. I said, hey, how are you? What are you doing? And he wrote back. He said, oh, I'm in Nevada. I'm retired. Then we got on the phone and talked. I told him I'd written a book about my days at the newspaper. And he said, oh, I'd love to read it. So I sent it to him. And he called a few days later and he said, oh, I loved your book. It's so much about the time frame, that I remember and recognize. And of course, I said to him, but geez, Frank, why haven't you written a book? I mean, you had all these great cases. And he said, I always wanted to, but I just never found somebody that I could trust to tell my story the right way. So, of course, I said, let's talk about that. And you're looking at the result. Just a quick cover a little bit about the background. Frank, born in San Francisco, went to St. Ignatius High School, joined the police department in 1964, worked the street patrols out of Northern Station until he was promoted, and some other details until he was promoted to homicide in 1970. He handled some 300 murder cases over his 22 years in homicide and then retired in 1992. I'm also born in San Francisco. I went to Lowell High School. I joined the Chronicle in 1967 as a copy boy and became a reporter 3 years later. As I said, I've covered a lot of these cases. My coverage of the Dan White trial was submitted for a Pulitzer Prize until I became the Giants publicist. So the result is we reconnected. A real partnership was born, and I think Frank will attest to that. Clearly, you already heard from a man who's a very unique individual and a very outspoken, opinionated guy. And I thought, this guy can really tell a story. And I said, I can write a story. Let's do this together. And we started on doing it. And the first thing we had to talk about, what's our working title? And I had a couple things in mind. And Frank's younger son, Dave, came up one day and he said, it's got to be 5 Henry 7. You got to have 5 Henry 7. And I'm like, what is that? and they explained 5 Henry 7 was Frank's radio call sign in his patrol car. And when the headquarters were trying to reach him, the 5 designated the Inspector's Bureau. Henry was the phonetic word for the H in homicide, and he was number 7 in the detail. So his partner was 5 Henry 4, and so on and so on. And I resisted at first, and then I realized this is a real police term, and I've been really happy ever since. It's very unique, and everybody now understands. And they don't have inspectors anymore, and they don't use these kinds of call signs anymore. So there's a little history there. But we spent 1.5 years working on this book. It came out last summer, and the response has been amazing. We started. I can't write 300 murder cases, right? So we said, well, let's do 10%. I had him pick out. He saved all his records, and he had all of his files, and I said, tell me your top 30, and we started there. And then I realized, well, that's War and Peace just doing that. So let's do 10% of that, or a smaller piece of that. And we ended up really focusing on 13 individual cases, the most interesting, the most unique, the most challenging, and the most well-publicized cases that Frank worked on. And we decided to start, of course, with the most famous case, and the one most people know about was a murder that occurred in an Ingleside. In a house out by the zoo in 1985. And Frank, tell us a little bit about the Night Stalker.
I'd love to get into that, but first I would like to say that it's been very memorable for me to reconnect with Duffy, and everything he said is spot on. We hooked up in so many different ways, and it's been a real, true pleasure working with the man. And it's just been a true marriage made in heaven. We get along very well. And we wrote a very dynamic book. If you have any interest at all in true crime and how real homicides cases are solved, I highly recommend our book, because there's 13 cases in them, and each and every case is unique. And Jerry Keneally, he's a retired San Francisco fireman. Jerry wrote a review on Amazon regarding our book. And he says, as a fireman, I've written, I think it was 23 novels, made up stories about homicide cases and detectives. He said, I've never read anything quite like 5 Henry 7. They walked me right through the Night Stalker case from beginning to end. And hopefully, I can't capture the whole case, if you're really interested, you have to get the book. And I'm not a salesman, but that's where it all is. Like Duffy said, we got a call, my partner and I, and we were having a quiet weekend. We were out at Goodman hardware store, and I was buying a faucet for a remodel I was doing at home, and my beeper went off, and we're told that we have a murder case out at 1620 Eucalyptus, the house you see depicted on the screen. An intruder had broke into that home late at night, somewhere around 10 o'clock at night, and he used a tire iron to pry open the downstairs window. Once he gained entry, he was into the garage. The couple had already turned out the lights. The house was dark. They were in bed. They were asleep. He sneaks up the inside staircase, goes right into their bedroom, shoots the husband in the head, kills him instantly, shoots the wife, and then sexually assaults her as she's dying. Neighbors hear whimpering. They don't know where it was coming from or anything else. So we surmise that she was suffering while he's raping her. That's how sick this man was. We would come out to find out later that this individual was a satanic worshiper. Anything evil, awful, nightmarish that he could think of, he would do to his victims just to satisfy his God being the devil. After he commits this heinous act, he goes into the kitchen, eats their food from dinner, drinks their milk, regurgitates onto the floor, goes into the living room, and etches into the wall a satanic message to the devil that he's praying to. That's the crime scene that we walk into. I'm not going to give you all the details. They're just too horrific. I know you're thinking, you told me enough, and I have. But that's the start. And right away, as soon as we were alerted, I grabbed the microphone in our police car. I said, headquarters, please have the crime lab, the coroner's office, and the photo lab also respond. These are all on-call teams, all now heading to this house, neatly manicured out in the beautiful area off Slope Boulevard in San Francisco. What we find out the next morning, my partner Carl Klotz got a phone call from a very diligent detective sergeant in the Glendale Police Department. His name was John Perkins. John Perkins had a case very similar to ours, so he's calling to see if there's any similarities. One of the things in our case that we had were casings, bullet casings left at the crime scene, and those bullet casings had a red primer. Pretty unique. And John Perkins tells my partner Carl Klotz, our murder case down here in Glendale, very similar to yours, the casings had red primer. Well, when Carl hears that, wow, he's excited, tells me. We immediately get tickets. We fly down to Los Angeles. We know no longer this so-called Valley intruder, walk-in killer. That's what this man was being called down in the LA area. 15 murders had occurred down there, all similar to the one I described. We fly down there, and we're gleaming everything we can from the LAPD, from the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. We worked with them for 2 days, and we took flyers maybe when we shouldn't have, put them in our folder. I wanted to know everything about their cases. The one thing that we left LA knowing is over the 6-month period of time, they had learned the name, the first name of the suspect. His name was Rick. Rick was identified when a solo motorcycle cop doing his job stopped Rick in a stolen Toyota, and he was talking to him, and he asked to see identification. Rick gives him a dentist card, and on that dentist card, the name Rick, not a last name, just Rick. And as that solo motorcycle cop is saying, I need to see more ID, the Night Stalker panicked. And he panicked, ran, jumped over a cyclone fence into a park, and he got away. So when we left Los Angeles, we knew they had a first name, Rick. That was it. So one of the keys to breaking this case happened fairly quickly. I realized that this fellow did not just walk into Mr. Pan's house and commit that murder on Eucalyptus. He had to have done other cases. So I went and I pulled a bunch of burglary reports from the last month. I was going to take 1 month at a time. And at that time, you can't make this stuff up. 2 young cops at Northern Station. One of them, my son, sitting right here, Dan Falzon, Northern Station officer, working with his partner, Marty Kilgariff. They were called out to a hot prowl burglary. Hot prowl meaning people are in the house when a burglar enters to commit his crime. That's a hot prowl burglary. Very serious crime. Danny and his partner made a very, very thorough police report. It so happened the home belonged to a very prominent dentist and his wife. They were out for the night. They had their daughter and her friends sleeping downstairs. They didn't hear the prowler crawl through the bathroom window. They didn't hear him ransacking the house, packing tons of stolen property into a pillowcase. They didn't know that he was looking out the window as the doctor and his wife returned home. As they pulled into the driveway, the Night Stalker's looking at them because the curtains are still pulled back when the crime lab man gets there. He then descends down the stairs, the front stairs, as Mr. and Mrs. Saroyan, the dentist and his wife, are coming up the inside staircase. They will never know how close they came to death. The 2 young girls downstairs and that dentist and his wife. So he makes his getaway. But that report that my son and his partner, Marty Kilgariff, made was very significant because I soon got a phone call from a sergeant down in Lompoc, California. One of the items my son listed in that burglary case was a bracelet. And what the dentist had done, it was a very expensive bracelet, and he etched with a tool his driver's license number on the inside. And that bracelet was turned in by a police informant down in Lompoc. The sergeant that had this information was very reluctant to give up his informant. All he wanted to tell me is that they had the bracelet. I got a little heated. Men in the detail thought I was overreacting. I knew we were onto something solid. Because left at this crime scene on the report that my son handled was also a Toyota tire iron used to pry open the window. Just too many similarities that really this needed to be followed up. So I finally convinced that sergeant down in Lompoc to have his informant call me. The informant says he has the bracelet. He got it from his mother-in-law. She lived in the East Bay in San Pablo. And I said, I'm going to need that information, everything about your mother, name, address, phone number. We head out that morning, my partner and I. I looked at another inspector and I said, Mike, come on with me. This is going to be big. And it turned out to be very big. That day, we came up with the name, and it wasn't easy. And there's a lot of ins and outs. Again, it's all in the book, detailed. We came up with the name Richard Ramirez is the Night Stalker. That not only broke our murder case, it broke all 15 cases down in Los Angeles, and he was convicted of all the LA cases, And when he was brought back up to San Francisco on his way to San Quentin, I'm putting him in the holding cell, I should say the bailiffs are, and he turns around and looks at me and he grins and he holds up his hand and he had the pentagram with the star inside. And he said, "Hey, Falzon, you'd like to know about those two old ladies, wouldn't you?" And I'm stunned. I didn't even know he knew my name. I said, "What two old ladies?" He laughed. He says, "You know, the two old ladies on Telegraph Hill." And it hit me like a sledgehammer. I said, "You're talking about the Caldwell sisters?" He goes, "Ha, ha, ha. That was me, Falzon. That was me." 6 months earlier, before the Pan murders, San Francisco had two ladies murdered by the Night Stalker. We'll come to find out later, he also crucified a 10-year-old girl down in the Tenderloin in a basement tenement. In the basement down there, he hung her after raping that little 10-year-old girl. This was a sick, demented man. Fortunately for all of us in the room, I can tell you, he's no longer with us. He died in San Quentin from cancer.
So we open the book with the Night Stalker case, and then we go back to Frank's childhood, growing up where he did, and his childhood friends and his relationship with his father were very moving and meaningful, how important his father was to him. And then eventually joining the police department. And then we come back into his early years in the department at Northern Station, and at a time when police were under attack in San Francisco and the Bay Area in large numbers. The underground violence was rampaging through the city. There were attacks on police. We start with some very interesting cases. As you can see, we call The Body in the Bay, another one called The Paper Bag Killer, had a psychological twist to it. A Chinatown hit that by a man named Chol Soo Lee, who eventually gets his case overturned, but there's more twists and turns there. And of course, that was made into a very popular movie called True Believer with James Woods and Robert Downey Jr. And then we move into the late part of 1973. Frank and his partner Jack Cleary at that time come upon the second of the zebra murders moments after it happened, out by the UC Extension, and the poor lady victim dies in Jack's arms. But they managed to capture the first of the zebra killers from there, and so. We carry on through the book in some of these early cases. And then comes the case I mentioned before that the documentary company was doing that put us together, just an awful, awful home invasion in Potrero Hill in 1974, where a man crawls into a young couple's upper bedroom window. Frank and Annette Carlson are their names, and he bludgeons poor Frank to death, ties him to a chair, and then assaults Annette for a number of hours and beats her, tortures her, slits her wrist, pours gas all over, sets the house on fire, and leaves. This is an awful crime. Frank's experience talking to Annette in the hospital is probably the most riveting pages that I can think of in the book. Do you want to say anything about that, Frank?
Yeah, this case, in my mind, it has to be the worst case I've ever handled, only because in that time I had small children. My wife and I, we just bought a home, and we were working on remodeling it, trying to make it the darling house that every young man, every young woman dream of having. And that's exactly what Frank and Annette Carlson were doing. They had bought this darling little Victorian on Kansas Street, a few blocks from San Francisco General Hospital, and they were in the process of making this house more beautiful than it was. And both of them were extremely dedicated people. He was downstairs doing the bookkeeping for the place where he worked, and his wife went to bed early. She half asleep, and all of a sudden there's a man standing over her bed with a knife that had a broken tip. She, of course, screams. Frank downstairs runs up to rescue her, only to be confronted with a man with a knife. So Frank says, like probably most men would say, look, don't hurt my wife, don't hurt me. We'll give you anything you want. He said, I want money. And he marched him downstairs, and then he ordered Annette to tie him into a chair. And she had no ropes or anything, so he cut cords off of lamps, and she tied her husband as best she could to one of the dining room chairs. And then he came and cinched the knots tighter, making sure Frank was not able to move his arms or his legs. He's tied to the chair. And then he viciously beat Frank to death. And it was horrific. And I'm not going to detail it because I've already grossed you out with that first case. This was unconscionable what this man did in front of Annette Carlson to her husband, Frank. Frank is now, his head totally destroyed. The coroner would testify at the coroner's hearing that Frank's head was more destroyed than suicides from skyscrapers. That's how horrible this man attacked poor Frank Carlson. Annette tells me, she said, I was screaming, but I know nothing was coming out. Frank had been listening to a stereo while he was doing his bookkeeping work. This man turned that stereo up very loud. So Annette knew she was next, but he took her upstairs into the bedroom. And for 3 hours, anything that would be unconscionable again, he did to Annette for 3 hours. And when she just said, please, just let me die, he had beaten her with a toy rocking chair she had since she was a child. He beat her with a rock inside a towel. She said, please, just let me die. He grabbed her wrist, slit her wrist, poured gasoline around her, poured gasoline around Frank downstairs, climbed out the window. Believe it or not, this woman, Annette, near death, somehow crawls out onto that rooftop, starts screaming for help, loud enough where people heard her, came to her rescue. Fire department gets her off the roof, gets her to the hospital. Homicide's called out. We don't know what we're walking into. No clue whatsoever. We got inside that house, we could see something terrible, terrible had really happened that night. And I looked at my partner, Jack. I said, Jack, there's no need that two of us stay here. I'm going over to the hospital to see if the surviving victim could tell me anything. As soon as I walked into that operating area, 3 nurses came out from a door, and I'll never forget their words. You got to get that bastard. You have to get him, and get him quick. This cannot happen again. And I'm looking at him. I have no clue what they're talking about. And then a doctor came out. He says, you a police inspector? I said, yes, sir, I am. He says, she wants to talk to you. This brave, courageous woman dying. The doctor looked at me. He says, Inspector, she's not going to live. He says, but she wants to talk to you. We want you in there. But first you're going to have to scrub up, put a mask on, a surgical gown, a cap, and we'll take you in there. I got my notepad. I go in there, and I couldn't believe what this woman looked like. And all she wants to do is tell me her story because she did not want this man to hurt anybody else. She wanted him caught.
So, and you know, again, the story goes on, and they do find a postal worker who lived on the same block by tracing, again, stolen jewelry, and they arrest him within a few days of the crime, and he goes to trial and he gets convicted and sentenced to death. that within months of this crime occurring, but this story still goes on today. And the reason is Frank Carlson's younger brother and his family, who are with us tonight, Eric Carlson and his wife Eileen and family, every 3 years have to deal with this case, because when the California eliminated the death penalty, it ended up converting this guy's sentence from from death to life, but not just life, but life with parole. And he's had 17 parole hearings, coming up on number 18 this April. He's been in prison for 49 years, but the Carlson's family has to continue. They have their own life sentences of having to fight this case and try to keep this man in prison. So they've created a website, Justice for Frank, meaning Justice for Frank Carlson. And that website gives you information on how you can submit your own letter to the parole board, insisting that this vicious killer stays in prison. Again, there's 3 chapters in the book about this whole case, and it's just horrendous that this family still has to fight this over and over again.
Yeah, I thought that was a great part of the book that you included, that element of it, that what happens when there's parole and who has to suffer at those hearings. And I think it was this case that moved it from annual to at least every 3 years.
Correct.
Right.
And he had one 3 years ago, which he didn't attend, but now there's another one coming up in a couple of months, and so the cycle starts again for the Carlson family. Yep. So it's been, and Frank has always been there to help with this, to write letters to the parole board to make sure that this Angelo Pavaggio remains in prison. So I know we're kind of running time-wise. I wanted to just let you know that some of the other cases that we talk about are a Hell's Angel killing with another little twist to it. A new zebra murder out at Ocean Beach after the original zebra killers had been convicted at trial and sent to prison. The story of Popeye Jackson, a prisoner's rights activist who was gunned down in his car in a street in the Mission District one night, which led to the whole section about the rise of the violent extremist underground, the Tribal Thumb, and some of these other underground movements. But then it's not all murders. One last thing I wanted to share with you, although we do have the City Hall thing in a minute, right. But I'm not sure how you're...
We have to do the City Hall thing, yes.
Okay. Well, then I'll just, if you don't mind, Frank, I'll just summarize. He's off duty on his way to a night class at City College one evening in February of 1977 when he drives past a corner grocery store, and his sixth sense of police sense picks up the outstretched arm of a guy at the front desk of the grocery store, and he could see that he's holding a gun. So he realizes he has stumbled onto an armed robbery in progress in the grocery store. So he pulls over. He's in civilian clothes. He's in his own car. He doesn't have a radio. Of course, there aren't cell phones. He realizes he's going to have to confront this guy himself. He gets out. He takes cover, waiting for the man to come out. And he's there with his badge out in one hand and his gun in the other, waiting to tell the man to freeze. When another gentleman gets out of a car and starts walking towards the store, he now realizes that he has to break his cover to stop that guy, or else that guy's going to go in the store and he's going to become a hostage or worse. And just as all this is happening, the robber comes out of the store, his arms folded around a bag full of money and his gun in the other hand, and Frank confronts him, freeze, police. The guy turns around within 10, 15 feet of Frank, fires off 2 rounds that both miss. Frank fires back, just grazes him in the shoulder. and the man turns to take off again. Frank takes his position with his own weapon, tells him again to stop. The man turns around, again, not 20 feet away, fires 4 more times at Frank. All of them missed. Frank fired 1 shot, and he was the only one to survive that shootout that day. He was highly honored by the department, named Policeman of the Year. It was just a very exciting moment, maybe more for us who are reading it than it was for Frank at the moment. But he survived, and possibly it saved people from being
The
killed.
only thing I'd like to add, first of all, one correction. You were right. The man fired a total of 4 shots.
Okay.
2, when I first confronted him with the gentleman I was trying to rescue, he walked out, fired 2 shots. Somehow, I think he had a .45, and a .45 is not a very accurate weapon. And he just sprayed bullets, hoping to hit the man with me or myself. Probably thought he was surrounded by cops. He missed, gets into the middle of the street. I have dead aim on him now, and I'm thinking, do I shoot or not? He didn't leave me any choice. He turned, looked directly at me. No exaggeration, from where I'm sitting to that back wall. That's the distance. I'm looking at him, he's looking at me. And he fired 2 shots, and I can remember seeing the arc of the .45. A .45 revolver has a kick to it. And it was twilight, and you could see the arc, the flame. And I remember just squeezing off 1 shot, and he went down. You know, movies, and you always know where your bullet goes. I had no idea. I didn't know if I hit him in the toe or where. But he's down. I had every right in the world to keep firing. I did, and I walked behind him. I wanted to get away. He was laying down with the gun between his hands, and he kept twitching. And all I remember seeing is the bag, and the bag of money had burst open. There's money on the street. And then it dawns on me, there's probably a partner in the store with a shotgun. He's going to come out. He's going to level me. So I start screaming at the door. How many more are in there? How many more are in there? And the Arab grocer sticks his head out, and he says, only one, him. So now I'm totally fixated on that gun that's moving, but he's not bringing it up. And then people come out of their house. I scream, I'm a police officer, badge back in my hand. Please get me help. Please get me help. The cavalry came. I was so happy when I saw that police car, red light and siren, shooting down Holloway Avenue towards Ashton Street in the Ingleside district. And all I could ever think up until tonight, including tonight, is all this happened for $279. A man lost his life. I could have lost my life, and that total stranger trying to go buy groceries could have lost his life for $279. Don't ask me to explain it. All I can tell you is the crazy world of a policeman's life.
And you make it clear in your book too that although you were an inspector and everything, you didn't ever fire your weapon other than that one time, basically.
I had fired my weapon one time before, and it was in the Fillmore on a beat, and I was across the street from a local bar in the Fillmore. 2 guys came out, got into a scuffle, which drew my partner and I our attention. We're looking across the street. One of them comes out with a gun and shoots the guy. And stupid us, we hollered, "Hey, police!" Now he turns the gun, he shoots across the street, and then starts running up towards Fulton, turns and runs down towards Webster Street. My partner and I in pursuit. And it was a miracle. He turns the corner. I don't know if any of you remember the old Pink Palace, which was like a fort out in the Fillmore district. He's heading towards the Pink Palace when uniform officers, a dog unit that has the dog in a cage, they come driving down the street. They see a man running with a gun. They stop him. We come around the corner. He throws the gun underneath the police car, and we arrest him. Again, that man up above was on our side, just as he was in arresting Angelo Pavaggio in the Frank Carlson case. Sometimes you need the big guy to give you a little support so that you can make your homicide case.
Frank says in the shootout incident that in the height of it, his thought was, "Dear God, if I'm going to die today, let me take this guy with me." That was his only thought, and the fact is, his one shot hit that guy right above his eye. He lived for 11 hours. It turned out he was on parole for holding up grocery stores. Just moving on a little bit more, that I think the high point of the book for us was the morning of November 27, 1978. Frank and I were both in our offices, me at the Chronicle, he at the Hall of Justice, when we were both told there'd been shots fired in the mayor's office. You need to get up there right away. We had the exact same instructions from our bosses. And I got in a car with a photographer, and Frank got in a car with his partner, Herman Clark, and we all raced up to City Hall. And on the way, he's thinking, if the mayor was shot, it must have been somebody from Jim Jones's group, because why?
Oh, Jim Jones, if you remember, 10 days prior to the assassination of Moscone and Melk, Jim Jones had killed over 400 people, having them drink the Kool-Aid. And the newspapers, my friends over at the Chronicle, had written a story about disciples of Jim Jones that had survived and were coming to San Francisco to take out politicians. So, of course, as we're driving up the street trying to get to City Hall, I'm thinking it's one of Jim Jones's disciples. And we get to City Hall, and we enter, and we climb those stairs. And to this day, you talk about craziness. When I was first told there's been a shooting in the mayor's office, that's a pretty heavy call. I mean, I've had a pretty interesting career up at that point, but to be told now there's a shooting in the mayor's office, it's overwhelming. And now as I'm running up the stairs at City Hall, I get to the top stair, and Jim Molinari, police sergeant inspector who was the mayor's bodyguard, is waiting there at the top of the stairs. And I looked at him. I said, "Jim," he says, "the mayor's dead, Frank." I said, "Oh, Jesus, the mayor's dead?" I said, "Do we have any suspects?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Who?" And he says, "Dan White." Wow. You have to know the background. And again, I'm not going to beat it to death. It's all in the book. Dan White and I grew up in Portland Playground. He was there when I was playing baseball. He was shagging baseballs when the big kids were hitting. He was 4 or 5 years younger than me. Dan White was a cop at Northern Station. He played on my softball team. We won the city championship 3 years in a row. We took an all-star team to South Lake Tahoe, the best players I could put together in the San Francisco Police Department. The shortstop was Dan White. He was like a kid brother. I'm not making any excuses for what he did. I'm telling you who he was before the horrendous acts that took place. I always thought he was a gentleman. I never heard the man swear. He would open a door for a lady. I remember the day he walked in the office. He had quit the police department 1 or 2 years previous, became a San Francisco fireman. Then one day he walks in the office, comes right over to my desk. I say, "Hey, Dan, how you doing?" He said, "I got good news, Frank. I'm running for supervisor of San Francisco, our old neighborhood, Frank. The Excelsior and Visitation Valley area. I'm running. I said, Dan, you're crazy. You don't want to go up there. You're not cut out to be a supervisor. Trust me, Frank, I'm going to take care of our people. Jack Cleary, my partner at the time, was even more emphatic. He says, he used the F word, you're an effing fool. You don't go up to City Hall. That's not where cops or people like us belong. You're not going to live up there. You're not going to be able to survive. And Dan laughed, shook Jack's hand. He says, trust me, I'm going to knock on every door and I'm going to get elected. This young man did exactly that. He was elected to the Board of Supervisors. Early on, one of his best friends, that also a newly elected supervisor from the Castro area, was a guy named Harvey Milk. They were buddies. Dan wasn't a racist or a homophobic. One of his best friends, one of the only ones he invited to his first child's baptism, was Harvey Milk. But everything over the next year or two dissolved. Distrust set in, politics being what it is. And I'm not going to say they were conservative politics, because there's no such thing in San Francisco. You have liberal politics, more liberal politics, and progressive politics. You don't have conservatives. So we had no knowledge, my partner or I. So when we took Dan White's confession, I said to him, Dan, I'm aware that you're a former San Francisco police officer. I've given you your Miranda rights. If you want to talk to us at this time, I'd appreciate you telling us in a narrative why you did what you did today, why you killed 2 people at City Hall. And this man is sobbing, convulsing, and he's explaining why he did what he did. It was all self-serving. It was all poor Dan's family. But it was in a very, very emotional tape. And when that tape was played for the jury during the trial, I think it was 6 or 7 jurors were crying. And then I think of the jury selection, why Dan White got off with voluntary manslaughter. And it was pretty much because anyone that was sympathetic to Melk or Moscone, they excluded themselves because they didn't believe in the death penalty. I cannot serve on a jury that would send a man to the gas chamber. So you're excused. So you ended up with, again, not a conservative jury, but more conservative than progressive. And that jury returned a verdict of manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter, 2 counts. And I remember I saw Duffy sitting behind me. He knew it was 2 first-degree murders. I knew it was 2 first-degree murders. Joe Freitas, the district attorney at the time, walks in, comes through the bulletproof glass, sits down between me, Tom Norman, the prosecutor. And Tom looks at me. Joe Freitas looks first at Tom, then at me, and he's addressing his question to me. He says, Frank, what do you think the jury's going to bring in? And I said, well, I've given it so much thought. I think the first one will be voluntary manslaughter, because they're going to think he went down there and in the heat of passion lowers the degrees for murder. He was acting in the heat of passion, shot and killed George Moscone. I said, but once he empties his gun, reloads, walks across the hall, and goes in and shoot Harvey Milk, that's murder in the first degree. So my thing was voluntary and first degree. Duffy's sitting out there. He was convinced 2 first degree. Joe Freitas looks at Tom Norman, the prosecutor, and Tom was a little irked at me. He looked at me, and then he looked at Joe and said, Frank has it all wrong. He says it's going to be 2 first-degree murder convictions. And we were the so-called experts. None of us, Duffy, myself, Tom Norman, none of us got it right. So he served 6 years, got out, I think, 5.5 years. One night I got a call to go see him. And I wanted to talk to him. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh my God. I went down to Los Angeles. His parents had sent tickets to the '84 Olympics, some boxing matches, track and field events. And when I got there, first day, nothing. Second day, not much. Third day, I think it was the boxing matches. Afterwards, we're in the courtyard in the Coliseum, and we both had a Coke, hot dog, and potato chips. And I looked at him. I said, Dan, I want to talk about that day of the shooting. Oh, I don't blame you, Frank. I really lost it. I said, oh, geez, Dan, you really did lose it, pal. I said, the city will never be the same. He says, yeah. He says, you can't imagine how bad it was going to be. How bad was it going to be, Dan? He said, I wanted 4 people that day. I'm stunned. I couldn't even, I'm looking at him, 4 people. He said, yeah, do you remember all those extra bullets in my pocket? I said, of course I do. He said, I wanted 4 people. There was 21 bullets, 5 shots for 4 people, and the 21st bullet was for myself. I said, who were the other 2 people you were going to kill that day? And when he said the names, I was so stunned. My day was over. I got on a plane and flew back to San Francisco, told my story to the DA's office. The 2 people he wanted to kill. He felt Willie Brown was controlling George Moscone and was pulling the strings. That was his opinion. He also felt, and his words, not mine, the most evil woman in the Board of Supervisors at that time was Carol Ruth Silver. I'm sure something horrible happened between those 2. I don't know Carol Ruth. If she walked in here, I might recognize her, probably not. But those were his words. And that's in the book. And to this day, as I sit up here, if Dan White really loved his family, really cared about his family, because he had a beautiful wife. Her father was a fireman, San Francisco fireman, salt of the earth woman. He had a child. If he really cared about them, why would he commit such horrific acts? Part of the blame, the fire department, their association, police department, their association, and the local community clubs who all said, Dan, you're representing us. You cannot leave the Board of Supervisors. You got to get your job back. Well, this naive young man was so gullible, he believed he had to get his job back and that he was going to be raked over the coals and destroyed as a person. Stupid. When I had heard in the homicide detail before the shootings that he quit the Board of Supervisors, I was one happy police inspector. I said to my partner, it was then Herman Clark, I said, Herman, this is great. Dan never belonged up there in the first place. Let him become a fireman again or come back in the police department. Cops, firemen were pretty simple people. We have wives or husbands. We have children. We have a home. We have a mortgage. We care about peace, tranquility, and trying to protect and serve the community that's hired us to do just that. So this case that you're looking at on it just lives with me along with the Pavageau case for the rest of my life.
And I think a lot of you can tell from listening to Frank talk, I hope you can, that when I heard these stories, I said, I need to help him tell these stories in a book. And we end the book circling back to 1985, just 2 months after the whole Night Stalker thing. Frank is on call once again when he gets a notice that Dan White has committed suicide in his garage out in the Excelsior district. I think time-wise, we won't need to go through that, but he sort of created his own gas chamber that the jury had kept him out of for a few years. And so that's the story of 5 Henry 7. Thank you both all for your attention, and Frank and I are happy to answer any questions you have, and then we'll be here signing your books afterwards. George?
Yeah, well, we have one question coming in. Just to, you mentioned right at the beginning, Duffy, that you got emails from people 3-4 every year about something or other. So the only way that you could have been involved in something more famous than what all the things that you just went through is if you had both worked in Dallas in 1963. Then you would have gotten 25 emails a day ever since.
And what's interesting is that Frank has heard already from a couple of people that are in these cases that he locked away to say they'd read the book and it was accurate. And it's amazing. It's just amazing the feedback that he's had. Yeah.
All right, well, we have a couple questions. Did you ever have any interaction with the cast or the production crew from the streets of San Francisco?
Well, initially they were using our office on the weekends. This is the streets of San Francisco with Carl Malden and Mike Douglas. And yes, they would be down at the Hall of Justice courtrooms and our office, also in the garage, filming shoots going in and out of the police garage. So that kind of interaction. But as far as holding conversations with either Carl Malden or Mike Douglas, I never did.
We also talk in the book about a number of movies that were shot here that Frank and other homicide inspectors served as advisors on, including The Laughing Policeman, Milk, of course, and some others. Because San Francisco is a great place for movies. There's a lot of them shot here.
Go ahead.
Hi there. My initial question was, what as citizens can we do? I never knew that when you get rid of the death penalty, it automatically moves into life with parole. I don't understand that, but I'll definitely look into that if there's anything as a citizen we can do. That's horrible. Because, I mean, I'm against the death penalty, but I'm all for life in prison with no parole. So I didn't know that. So that was my first question, if you think there's anything we can do to...
So I'd actually refer that to Frank Carlson's younger brother, Eric, who's here and who's leading this Justice for Frank effort.
Yeah, I don't want to steal your thunder, guys. You're doing an amazing job, but that's a great question. California has always had a very complex relationship with the death penalty. California actually has the death penalty. It's not enforced. It's not utilized. And Gavin Newsom recently sort of made a proclamation that henceforth, as long as he's in charge, it's not going to be imposed. But what happened was, in 1976, there was a judgment by the U.S. Supreme Court that the death penalty was cruel and unusual punishment, and all the states in America were subjected to this change. And the bureaucratic snafu at the time in the state of California was the next worst sentence was life with parole. There was no life without parole when the death penalty was in place, because in the 70s, they were actually executing people. So what happened is, once that problem was identified, the legislature very quickly scrambled and put life without parole in place as a punishment. But there were 67 individuals, including the Manson family, Sirhan, the person who murdered my brother, and they got this like upgrade, and no one was in a position to resentence them or try them again. The population is declining due to attrition. People passed away. There are now 19 people left in the system of the 38,000 people that are incarcerated for murder or being accessories to murder. These 19 individuals have this special term, and it's impacted my family as a result. And the parole hearings started in 1980, and they happened every year. And my mom became an activist and worked in Sacramento to change the law. And was very successful. Frank put her together with some other individuals that felt the same way, and they got the law changed in terms of terms and conditions associated with paroles. But unfortunately, we have to deal with the consequences.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, justiceforfrank.org.
Here's another question.
Hey guys, just want to say thanks first of all for sharing your incredible story and your life. So what do you think about today's current state of the San Francisco Police Department and the seemingly like lack of morale and the kind of stuff that's going on? How do you see it? All your years of experience and like apparently hard to get new officers to sign up and seemingly having an effect on the state of the city today.
I'm very upset with the direction of the San Francisco Police Department, because I honestly believe when I left that department, we were heading in the right direction. And unfortunately, I do believe in diversity 100%. But when you think about diversity in the police department, it had to happen overnight. So it couldn't happen with the current standards. They had to lower standards. You lower standards, you don't know what you're getting. And you saw it very clear in Memphis a few nights ago, what lowering standards cause. You always have to get the cream of the crop. When I came in, they said, you'll be the last that will be allowed with 2 years of college or a high school diploma. It's going to be a 4-year degree. It's not the way it is today. And sadly, what I see is laws are coming off the books, or they're being told, don't enforce these laws. And the police officer, they're not stupid. They're working people. If they know they can go and work 8 to 5 and get a paycheck and do nothing because the city prefers that, that's what they're going to do. But the one that suffers is that taxpayer. I mean, I read the paper, maybe 2 papers every day, because I'm so involved in crime and street justice, and I realize not everybody deserves prison. Diversion is wonderful. But when you're allowing people that really want to hurt, that are hurting so much inside, they want to hurt others, and you're putting them back out in the street, that's a mistake.
First of all, thank you very much both for coming, for working together on the book. And the book is available in the lobby. And thank everyone for coming. And so ends another event at the Commonwealth Club. We've just passed our 120th anniversary a couple of days ago. So this is now our 121st year. Thank you.